For the subject area that we are looking at in the following, the point is to perform a certain operation as cost efficiently as possible. Therefore, a decision has to be made as to whether it is more cost efficient to outsource the work or to invest in own machinery, so the work can then be carried out by the company itself. The term cost-effective has come up, but what are costs? Economically, we define costs as value consumption. They quantify the monetarily valued amounts of production factors and services that are used or consumed while generating operational output and services. Costs are thus to be seen directly linked to operational output. The two terms, output and costs, are closely related. Concerning the output, we assume that a particular product is produced or, like in our example, a particular work is performed. Consequently, values and quantities of used or consumed production factors and services need to be determined. Values that are consumed in the production are, for example, operating supplies. Supplies must be purchased. The purchase is determined by a market value that adjusts itself according to the supply and demand in the market. The applied physical quantity, for example, liters of diesel, can therefore be priced at market value. Costs in agricultural production are caused by the consumption of short-term production materials such as animal feed, fertilizers, diesel, etc. Costs can also result from the use of long-lived, multi-year means of production such as machines, buildings, and equipment. Costs arise from the use of labor as production factor. For salaried workers, which are mostly external workers, this can be quantified through the calculation of wage costs. For non-salaried workers, usually working family members, imputed costs can be determined by calculating the wage costs through the opportunity costs for their own work. Examples could be agricultural services or contract work, accounting services, drying services, etc. Costs are also incurred for the use of the production factor capital. For debt capital, the interest expense is calculated. In turn, for equity, we use imputed costs by determining the opportunity costs for the use of the production factor. In order to determine the cost of land, we take the rent for leased land and for owned land an imputed rent, opportunity cost of the land. Further costs are, for example, insurance, taxes, etc. Overhead costs are essentially the costs of production factors which are taken up by several different production processes, operating branches. Therefore, they can't be uniquely allocated to one particular process. This is usually the case with land, most of the buildings, permanent family and outside labor, as well as some of the machinery and equipment. Costs that are attributable to a group of production processes are characterized as cost center overheads. In contrast, special costs are directly and indirectly attributable to a product. For example, the cost of seed, fertilizer, concentrated feed, or the cost of special equipment or special buildings. An agricultural production branch or production process causes attributable special costs and also a proportionate share of overhead costs. Within the context of planning calculations, the overhead costs are replaced by opportunity costs, because the production processes which are paid for by overhead costs could be used alternatively for several other products. Hence, the utilization of a production factor for one product usually entails foregone profit for not being used to generate another product. Let's consider the total cost of a farm. On the one hand, we have the above-mentioned special costs. On the other hand, we have overhead costs. Special costs are incurred, for example, in crop and grassland cultivation for the respective fertilizers, pesticides, hail insurance, capital costs, current assets, and other. There are also special costs arising in livestock production. regular stock turnover, concentrated feed, electricity, water, capital costs, attributable building costs. A dairy cattle barn, for example, is attributed to dairy production as well as interest claims for cattle and current assets. The costs for the use of in-house produced resources come within the area of special costs, since they incur the use of farm-produced feedstuff and fertilizer and special labor costs. Therefore, attributable, permanent, and non-permanent workers, attributable variable costs of tractors and machinery, attributable fixed costs of special purpose machines, and attributable interest claims also belong to the special costs. At the same time, the overhead costs are influenced by the amount of non-attributable costs in the areas of labor, capital, or other non-attributable expenses.